Well, welcome back to the next episode of TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest, Richard Gabler from the Media Institute, President and CEO. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Glad you're here.
Really appreciate it. So give us a little background about the Media Institute, what it's involved in, and its mission.
Sure. Well, the Media Institute is a nonprofit organization. It's been around since 1979. So in fact, we're celebrating our 45-year anniversary this year. But we have three main goals. The first is to promote sound communications policy. The second is to promote a strong First Amendment and free speech and press. And the third is excellence in journalism. So we go about that in a number of different ways. Just to focus on the First Amendment side for a minute, we have a First Amendment Advisory Council, which has some of the country's top First Amendment experts, Floyd Abrams, Bob Corn-Revere, Rod Smola. I'm happy to say you're a member of it, so we value your membership as well. And that's a very distinguished group that gives us a lot of good advice and has helped in many ways over the years. And we were also the creators and still promote and manage Free Speech Week, which is a nationwide annual celebration that takes place the third week of October every year. And
so coming up, we're a month away.
That's right. It's almost here. We started that in 2005, and it just gets bigger and better every year.
So as President and CEO, what's your role and how has it changed over the time period?
Well, my role is a little bit of everything here, as you can well imagine. Everything from strategy, setting policy directions, to overseeing the work, having a hand in writing and editing, and it's just everything that goes into managing a nonprofit organization.
Does the job change over time? Does it ebb and flow? Does it get repetitive, or is every new year a new opportunity?
Well, there's some elements of both, actually. It certainly changes a lot. I started here in 1981. At that time, cable television was regarded as one of the new media. So that gives you some idea of how things change. And things just continue to change. Obviously, now that we've gone through that and into the digital age, and back when I started, we didn't have computers or cell phones or anything like that. So the technology has certainly been going great guns. And but still, the funny thing is, there are some issues and some things that seem to have a life of their own that just keep hanging out there, like maybe for 10 or 20 years or even longer. Probably earlier on, the fairness doctrine was a good example of an issue that just, it wouldn't go away until it finally did. And now I think maybe we're seeing the same thing with net neutrality. So there are some constants that may last for, years or decades, but everything, with streaming now and all the digital platforms and everything that's happening in that realm, certainly it keeps changing. It's always fresh.
Generally, your organization is funded by contributions from media companies, mostly traditional media companies, and those with strong conviction on the First Amendment. How do you pick your projects?
Well, I'm responsible for picking the projects, and we look for projects that generally have some element of First Amendment, free speech to them, or that involve communications policy. Because what we do is, the Institute is kind of maybe unique in a sense that we are both an advocate for sound communications policy, and by that I mean that we favor a marketplace approach to issues facing the industry. We think that competition and competitive environment is a better way of moving things forward and innovating rather than government regulation. So all things being equal, we'll go for a marketplace solution. So there's an advocacy component. And then there's also a sort of what you might call a marketplace of ideas, or a forum. We do that through our luncheon series. We have a series that we've had now since 1981 called Communications Forum, and we bring in a whole variety of speakers. You've been our speaker a couple times, and we have a whole variety of viewpoints and industries and government representatives, government agencies represented. So that's a real forum. And we also have a policy blog, which likewise has a forum for all sorts of ideas, sometimes competing ideas. But that's all part of the give and take, and we think that's in keeping with the spirit of free speech and the idea that more speech is better speech.
How do you maintain independence? How do you make decisions without having to worry about who funds your organization or your projects?
Well, see, we're not a trade association, so we're not beholden to one set of companies. So we get support. We don't call them members; we call them supporters. We get support from companies across the media spectrum: media, telecom, digital. It's a whole variety. But we don't have to say, fall into step when they say, jump. We don't have to jump, and that gives us a great deal of independence. Sometimes it causes some tensions because we might take a position on something that not all of our supporters agree with, something that a trade association usually doesn't have the luxury of doing. But that gives us a great deal of independence, and I think in the long run it gives us a lot of credibility.
Does anyone do what the Media Institute does today? Is another organization that you're competing with, or do you have a unique field lane to yourself?
I think we have a unique lane in a lot of ways. There are organizations that do similar things, like bits and pieces of what we do. There are some organizations, of course, like some of the big journalism foundations that are involved in journalism issues, freedom of information issues, that sort of thing. There are some that are more involved in different policy aspects, but I don't think there's anyone that has the exact mix that we do. And again, that's kind of a function of being an independent group and being able to pick and choose what we want to do.
So there have been a number of court cases at different levels, including going to the Supreme Court. Many of those last couple of years involving the high-tech industry and its relationship to First Amendment activities. Does the Media Institute get involved in court cases over the years? Has it been involved since its early days? Does it file amicus and the like as decisions are made?
Yes, we do. We've been very involved in the courts. In fact, that's one of the, maybe lesser known generally activities that goes on here. Over the years, we've been involved in over 250 court cases, as you said, all the way from local, federal district and appellate courts up to the Supreme Court. A lot of those have dealt with First Amendment topics, especially those of importance to journalists and media companies, like freedom of information requests and access to government information, things along those lines. But a whole range of things going back to, like Turner Broadcasting and the Arrow and Arrow Killer cases, copyright cases. So a whole variety of cases affecting all sectors of the media.
And do you have a good track record, or is it just a tough, you pick the hardest cases? How's it go?
Well, we get involved where we see a need and where we think we can make a difference. And I think overall, I've never gone back to add up exactly how it's all worked out, but I think overall we have a pretty good record.
Does the Media Institute's voice, its uniqueness and its structure, is it an opportunity to talk about some of these issues that are facing the high-tech industry? I know you haven't necessarily jumped into some of the recent cases. Is it something you look to and going forward?
I think so. I think that's where we could play, again, a unique role. And we have a voice that does have a lot of credibility, and I think it would play a significant role in that area. In fact, we've been getting more and more into the digital space. Back in 2020, we created a new program here called the Digital Media Center, and that's involved in all sorts of areas related to the digital world. We work with a good friend and colleague, Stuart Brotman, who is our digital media laureate, and he's very knowledgeable about these matters. And in fact, we've just published a new study he's written called Net Vitality 3.0, which looks at the robustness of the broadband internet in countries around the world. And once again, the United States comes out on top. It's a good thing. But that's a very important study following other studies he's done. He started this in 2015. We published his first Net Vitality study. And then he did an updated version in 2018, and now this is the third iteration. So that's the sort of thing we're doing in the digital realm, getting more and more involved in that. And obviously that's where the direction of the industry is going, so that's where we need to be.
Is all that information available on your website?
It is, yes. readily available. We hope people will take a look at it.
So let's turn to some policy a little bit. Media ownership or media consolidation, depending on someone's viewpoint, has been a hot topic in communication policy for the last, 3+ decades, I say, at least in my involvement. So does it trouble you when policymakers, make quips about the media companies and call it, lamestream media or mainstream media when they try to execute, their job and their responsibility? Does it hurt the soul to hear that? Is it something that, it's something that's done by everybody, right? It's not one side or one party or the other. Everyone takes their shots at the media companies. Does that problematic for our current environment that we live in?
Well, I think the term mainstream media, personally, that doesn't bother me a whole lot. I think if we're referring to, the major broadcast networks and a handful of cable networks, handful of newspapers, online now with digital national reach, mainstream, well, that's kind of descriptive. Now, lamestream, that's another case altogether. Obviously, a pejorative term used by people who are trying to disparage the press and to create a feeling of distrust toward the press. So I think that's not only hurts the soul in a sense, but it does have some long-term, I think, probably damaging effects on the way this country views its press and the role in democracy. But it's I think a worrisome trend.
So is there, there's been this belief and the accusation that the mainstream media, collectively makes decisions and they decide, where they're going to be on. Is there anything to suggest, and you're dealing with them for so many decades, that there's any viewpoint that they come together, or do you find them fighting amongst each other just as much as they find commonality sometimes?
Yeah, I don't think there's any conspiracy among the broadcast networks or the cable companies. In fact, they're all competing. There's a very competitive environment, and if anything, it's just super competitive.
And does it? I always, the question of what's the focus of whether it's a broadcaster or a cable network or a news organization or an entertainment information channel. Is it? To me, it's always been, the goal is to try and figure out how to attract as many viewers and audience therefore to sustainable operations going forward, right? It's the way you make money. It's the way you can continue your audience. You want credibility for the product. Is there? Do you would agree with that concept?
Well, I think certainly any media outlet wants to give, provide value and provide service to its viewers and give them something that viewers want to watch. I think maybe back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of concern, justified, about a trend towards sensationalism. Back then we had major corporate players taking over the networks, and with a kind of renewed or a new emphasis on the bottom line, and that push just created some movement towards sensationalism that probably not that good from a journalism standpoint, but I don't see that to be such a factor nowadays. There are so many sources of news out there that there are ways to get attention and ways to compete without having to resort to a 1980s style of sensationalism.
Well, that's a good point you raise. Is it new technology, whether it be from the high-tech sector or some of the different options that consumers themselves have to make news and make audience attention? Do they create more competition to the existing players and force them to be better operators and be more coherent and more attuned to the needs of listeners or watchers or whatever the case may be?
I think so. I think that's having an effect. Certainly, the more competition you have, you're going to see that happening. And the fact that younger people now, are getting their news in different ways than traditional sources to a large extent, and that's probably having an effect on shaping the nature of the coverage and the way it's presented and the length and focus and so forth. I'm not saying that in any sort of negative way, but just, in a different way, just changing with changing consumer tastes in how people get their news and what they expect from it.
Do you think that the media ownership limitations, the rules that exist today, need to change to reflect all the new entrants, all the different voices, and with the audience switching not only to alternative voices, but to other sources completely, and other way that, how much attention they're going to have to news in general? Do the rules make any sense in today's environment?
No, they don't. As you well know, the FCC still has ownership rules in place on broadcasters, like a 39% audience reach and a 50% UHF discount, things like that make no sense nowadays. They're regulating the media the same way they did back in the 1950s, as if it's a scarce commodity. Of course, that was the whole rationale for regulating the media back then, that there were only so many airwaves and they weren't making any more of them. So they had to be controlled by the government and allocated to broadcasters who would have to operate in the public interest. But nowadays, there's such a, cable and all the digital streaming, everything else. The media landscape has just, exploded. And there are so many media outlets and types of media, ways to get your information, that there's no reason to have these archaic regulations hamstringing one segment of that group at the expense of really more competition.
What's been the impact on existing broadcasters or cable companies or anyone who's in this space? What's been the impact of having rules that govern their activity and no rules for anybody else? How does it change their approach, and does the market look favorable towards them?
Well, it's really hobbles them. It's very anti-competitive and puts them at a great disadvantage, especially in terms of even cable or certainly now the streaming services, the big tech companies getting involved. To have broadcasters functioning under these kind of regulations is just really creates a very uneven playing field, and for no reason at this point. And it's of course that's reflected in market value of companies, and it just has other ramifications in terms of the sustainability of their business model and so forth, but doesn't have to be that way.
So there's kind of two approaches that that Congress and the FCC have looked upon. One is that you try and regulate everybody the same way, you parity, and pull everybody within the current regulations. Or the other is to recognize that you can't do that, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and that is to deregulate everybody and let them fight it out in the marketplace. Do you have a position on that, or have you given any thought?
Well, we've given that a lot of thought, man. I think it's time to set the genie free, and say enough already.
Maybe let the genie be free.
That's right. So really, you're right. There are two ways to level that playing field, but I don't think we want to create more of the same problems that we've had in regulating the broadcasters. There are plans out there now to regulate big tech and other the newer entrants in the field. And do we really want to do that? Is the FCC the right agency to do that in any event? So we're going to take this growing, competitive, innovative industry, and we're going to put government regulations on them and tell them what they can do and can't do. What could go wrong with that?
Well, and part of the difficulty is that the high-tech industry doesn't operate just in the United States. It's a global entity, and a lot of the technologies can be initiated from anywhere across the planet. And so if you try and regulate in one area, you're pushing providers to an area that may not be regulated, and it's still going to get the content in one way or the other. It's kind of the genie problem we talked about.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
So I've been involved, and this, and I certainly appreciate the engagement in the Media Institute's Madison project. Can you take us through a couple seconds on what that project is intended and how you selected it and where you intended to go?
Sure. The full name of the project is the Madison Project: Free Speech and Press in American Democracy. And that subtitle tells you a lot, because the Madison Project was an attempt that we initiated here to address the issue of where is democracy going and what is the role that free speech and free press are playing in that. And we got, we've been very concerned that with all the misinformation out there and all the attempts to manipulate information and often from some pretty nefarious sources, and we're just concerned that a weakening of free speech and press is going to have an effect of weakening democracy, because the two are very closely linked. One of the ideas of a democracy, one of the pillars of a democracy, is having a strong, free, independent press, not only to provide news to people, but to provide a sort of check on government. And the first thing that always goes by the wayside as a country moves toward a more totalitarian posture is the free press. So we need a free press, we need free speech, and we need that for our democracy. And at a time when there's so much division in this country and so many different factions and sowing misinformation and conspiracy theories and everything else, we just have become fearful that this is going, all this type of information could have ultimately a negative impact on the strength of our democracy. And one of the things about the Media Institute is that we do have a very strong belief in the fundamental premise of a democratic country, democracy. So we thought we could make an effort here to do what we could to address that issue, to shed light on it, and to educate the public about it. So we started this a year ago in October, and we launched it at our gala last year. We'll be coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the project next month. But here's what, just in a short time, we have published 4 major issue papers. Authors include an FCC commissioner, the president of the National Association of Broadcasters, our own Stuart Brotman. We have done a luncheon presentation. Stuart did a wonderful luncheon presentation for us on James Madison and his wife, and how he got involved in creating the Bill of Rights, and he's the author of the First Amendment. So that's why we named the Madison Project after him. We've done that, and now we've just released a videocast that talk about being heavily involved in. It's your videocast interviewing Floyd Abrams, the country's premier First Amendment attorney, on recent Supreme Court cases involving social media. So we've been very active and trying to bring a lot of attention to this whole concern about where democracy might be heading if free speech and free press are threatened.
What is James Madison's brilliance in the creation and adoption of the First Amendment? Has it stood the test of time, or there are a number of people that want to either amend it or enact new statutes that would have an impact on the ability to have a free press and a free speech from individuals? Has it stood the test of time? I guess I'd start with there.
Yeah, I think it has definitely stood the test of time. Absolutely. When you think about Madison, he was passionate about the idea of a democratic form of government, having a strong democracy. And he realized that part of that was having a free press and various viewpoints out there, and the ability to criticize the government, the ability to have different viewpoints with other news outlets. And he knew that was essential if this democracy was going to succeed. So I think that was part of his brilliance in recognizing that. He was very suspicious of government having control over the media. He wanted to create a firewall between the media and the government's ability to regulate it, and in turn, regulate the speech of its citizens. So I think his principles were absolutely sound and have absolutely stood the test of time.
What's on the horizon for the Media Institute? What do you see as future projects, maybe unrelated to the Madison Project or a part of?
Well, I just want to touch on one Madison project. Madison project work product, if I could. We're going to be coming out shortly with a voter guide, an election year guide to media and democracy, which you've been heavily involved in, I'm proud to say. And I think this is going to be a real value to citizens out there, giving them some practical, hands-on guidelines for how to assess the truthfulness and the veracity of information they're receiving in this election year, where they can go out and, if an image looks funny or some video they're watching looks funny, or gives them some ideas on how to assess that to see if it's been generated by AI or manipulated somehow, in the shop, and other ideas for how to get a wide range of information, how to go about assessing that. So it's going to be a very practical, hands-on sort of publication. We're going to make it widely available, and we hope that this will play a small part in helping this election cycle, and in a bigger sense, the whole democratic process.
Is it fair to say, something very important to me, that it doesn't attempt to engage itself in picking candidates or selecting who people should vote for? It completely leaves that aside and leaves that to the voter themselves. It doesn't get engaged in that in any capacity. Is that right?
That's right. It's totally neutral. It's not designed to be a sample ballot or something like you get from a political party at the election place. No, this is totally nonpartisan, totally non-political. It's really media literacy for voters is probably a good way to think of it.
I like that. So let's turn to some fun topics. The Media Institute hosts an annual gala where it awards some prestigious, rewards to those that have been engaged in the First Amendment and free speech and its agenda going forward for many years. Who are this year's recipients, and how soon will we see the gala arrive?
Well, it is a fun event. You're right about that. So it'll be arriving on October 29th. It'll be at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel here in D.C. And it is always a magnificent event. And we do present awards. We call it our Free Speech America Gala because that is the focus, and it usually happens during or right around Free Speech Week that I mentioned earlier. So it has a very strong, theme of free speech and free press. And this year we present two awards. The first is called the Freedom of Speech Award, and we'll be presenting that to Floyd Abrams, the legendary First Amendment attorney I mentioned earlier. Who better to give a free speech award to, right? Than the person who argued the Pentagon Papers case and has made a very had an extremely distinguished career supporting and promoting the First Amendment. So that's the first award. The second is the American Horizon Award for Industry Leadership. And we're giving that to Patrick Butler, who is now President and CEO of America's Public Television Stations, which is the association of PBS stations around the country. And he's just retiring, as a matter of fact. So it'll be kind of extra special to give him that recognition at the conclusion of his formal career. But he's had a long history with the Washington Post, Newsweek, and he's just had an incredible career. Started out, he was a speechwriter for Gerald Ford. So he's certainly someone who has shown a lot of vision and moved the industry forward in some important ways. So we're honored to honor both him and Floyd Abrams. And we're giving a special Lifetime Achievement Award this year, which we usually don't do, but we're giving it to our chairman of the board, former FCC chairman, Dick Wiley. So Dick is he's a Washington institution. It's someone who everyone knows, and he knows everyone. So I wish I had his Rolodex. But he's been our chairman now for a good many years, and it's just, I couldn't imagine having a better chairman of the board. And we just want to recognize him in an appreciation for all that he has done, not just for the Institute, but for his whole career. It has just been a stellar career and has been an inspiration to many other up-and-coming attorneys and public servants.
All right, last question. When you look out, and you grab your crystal ball and say, 10 years from now, what does the Media Institute look like? And are you still serving as its head and picking out its agenda?
Well, to answer the first part of that question, I think the Media Institute definitely needs to be here. There will never be a shortage of issues and interest that the Media Institute should have a strong voice in. So there will always be threats to the First Amendment. There will always be threats to free speech and free press. There will always be a need to promote competition and innovation and marketplace approach to policy questions. So I think the role of the Media Institute, the need for the Institute, is only going to get stronger as time goes on. So as far as my role here in 10 years from now, I'm not sure. I think my crystal ball is a little cloudy on that point, but I'm sure it'll be in good hands one way or another.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time and shedding important light on these important topics and giving us your perspective on things that are so fundamental to American society. So, Richard, thanks so very much.
Hey,
much appreciated.
Thank you,
very
Mike.
much.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks
Appreciate everything you're doing. Thank
much
you.
appreciated.